Jesus Christ, that's Jason Bourne.
This is where the fun begins.
Yeah, this is big brain time.
Get your ass back here, boy!
And his name is John C.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
He's just standing there, menacingly.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down.
I've become more powerful than any Jedi.
Here's your chance, do your dance at the space
Oh, I don't think so.
Alright.
Hey, chill, chill.
Come on and slam, and welcome to the town. Come on and slam, you want to town. Hey, yo, what you gonna do? Hey, yo, what you gonna do? Hey, yo, what you gonna do? It's your boy JC. I ain't so past that thing, watch me play. But I got that girl, it's me, jam. All in your face, what's up? Just feel the bass, drop it, lock it down the room, shake it, quake it, space.
Please, I beg you!
Wait a minute. There are too many of them. What are we going to do?
You underestimate my power!
Take a seat.
Help me. The way you're fighting, you wouldn't fly.
Finish him! Get over here!
What is up, guys? So today for this video we're going to take a look at the chosen one, Anakin Skywalker himself. So today for this hero guide we're going to be taking a look at his star cards, we're going to be talking about his abilities, and I'm also going to be showcasing some gameplay in heroes versus villains and also in Galactic Assault, just to give you guys a better idea of how I play him in those specific game modes. Anakin, he's a very strong character, arguably top 5 in the game in terms of like best characters in this game. He's very fun to play as, however at the same time he does have his downsides where some of his abilities they just bug out and they're like a death trap whenever you use them. However, when his abilities do work, Anakin is really strong. He can clear out rooms very quickly and he can definitely hold his own against other saber wielders or even blaster heroes as well. Anakin is a very fun character to play, and a lot of players who come to this game, Anakin, he's like a fan favorite. If you watch the Clone Wars, you know about Anakin. If you've seen the movies, you know about Anakin. Anakin is the chosen one, and he is very strong, very fun to play as well also. So one thing I want to talk about as well before I get into my star cards and I showcase them, Anakin is the only hero on the light side that has 4 abilities. And what I mean when I say 4 abilities, this actual fort ability, what it does, retribution, it actually does damage to your opponents. An example of having a fort ability is Boba Fett on the dark side, where his fort ability is just his jetpack, however his jetpack doesn't actually do damage. So Anakin on the light side, he's the only character who actually has 4 abilities, where his 4th ability actually does damage. And this ability, when it actually is used in the right scenario, it's very, very good. However, in some cases, sometimes it actually gets you killed more times than some. Like I mentioned, Anakin is in a buggy state, but we're going to be jumping straight into my star cards and getting straight into this video, guys. So jumping straight into Anakins Star Cards, you guys can see the ones I use. When it comes to Anakin, there are some people who I will understand they will have a different loadout, and that's completely understandable. Everyone plays heroes a specific way. However, these star cards, they actually suit my playstyle more. Whenever I play Anakin very aggressively, and these star cards, they benefit my playstyle, and overall they benefit his abilities as well. So I'm going to be going over in some other clips explaining why I use these star cards and why I find them to be really beneficial to actually maximizing Anakin's full potential. So the first star card that I use is called Raw Strength. And the reason why I use this star card is because it actually allows Anakin's Heroic Might ability to do an increased damage of 50 on top of the damage that it already does for Heroic Might. With Anakin, Heroic Might is a little bit buggy, unfortunately. Sometimes you actually take damage more than you actually dish out. And one of the things about Anakin when using this ability is that you get damage reduction. Damage reduction in this game is really, really good because it just means that you're actually able to take more hits without draining your HP at a faster rate. So whenever you use Heroic Might, you will get damage reduction. However, sometimes when using Heroic Might, unfortunately, there seems to be a bug or an issue where sometimes you're actually taking way more damage and it looks like the damage reduction isn't even working because the damage you're receiving literally outnumbers the damage that you actually output. However, when it does work with Heroic Might, what this ability does is that when you use Heroic Might, Anakin charges up, and whenever he receives damage, the radius of his Heroic Might actually increases, which is actually really good because let's just say as an example, playing Galactic Assault, and let's just say you go into a room full of enemies, all your enemies are shooting at you, then you can just stay within the radius of them, or you can go into the middle, actually charge up this ability and watch the range increase while you're receiving damage. And because you have the star card equipped, it actually allows you to do an added 50% bonus damage increase to your star card already. So it actually helps out Anakin a lot. Another good thing for having this star card is that because it actually allows Anakin to do 50 bonus damage when using Heroic Might, in most scenarios you'll actually be able to one-shot your opponents. So as an example, let's just say you're playing Galactic Assault and you go into a room full of droids as an example, Anakin is standing there, you're charging up Heroic Might. Because you have this damage increase to your Heroic Might ability, you'll be able to one-shot opponents. Unfortunately, heavies, they kind of fit in this category where they may not get one-shotted, especially if they are overhealed. However, in most scenarios, you'll actually be able to wipe out enemies really, really quickly. So that's just a really good bonus about having this star card as well. The second star card I'll use is called Attraction. And the benefits of this star card is, for Anakin's pull ability, it actually increases his range by 5. So let's just say as an example that you're playing heroes versus villains, and that Palpatine player is just running away from you. They're being annoying the entire match and you just want to just get them so that you can actually get rid of them as fast as possible. Having an increased range on top of your pull ability is so helpful, as in most scenarios whenever enemies are a fair distance away from you, you'll actually be able to pull them towards you, and in most scenarios you'll actually be able to pull them towards you. And because Anakin's pull is so good, it actually pulls enemies directly to his feet or sometimes on the side of him. So you just have to adjust your character just to the left or to the right depending on what side they land on. And because of this, having the range increase as well, more times than some, you'll actually be able to get enemies down to a really low HP as well, because one thing about Anakin's pull ability is that it actually does damage as well. So when you pull an enemy, you'll also do damage to them, and also in more scenarios, if the pull doesn't actually kill them, you'll actually be able to maybe follow up with maybe a passionate strike, or you can actually use Heroic Might, or you can actually just finish up by using your lightsaber swings. Either one is perfectly fine, or depends on your playstyle and what you'd actually see fit. And the final star card that I use is called Steamroll, and the benefits of this star card is it actually decreases Anakin Skywalker's stamina reduction to a maximum of 40%. So just an example, is for every trooper defeated, it is going to decrease his stamina by 2%. So as an example, you need to defeat 20 troopers or 20 enemies to have a maximum of 40% stamina reduction. I find the star card to be really beneficial, and I think this is one of the staple star cards for Anakin, as Anakin, he doesn't really have that much stamina. Anakin has received roughly maybe 4, 5 or even 6 nerfs, I believe, since he first came to the game when he was firstly overpowered. And now Anakin, he's in a balanced state. At the same time, he can bug out, unfortunately. However, one thing with Anakin that I personally find actually needs a little bit of adjustment is his stamina. His stamina isn't the greatest. However, in more scenarios, you can actually hold your own against a couple saber wielders or even blaster characters as well. When you're deflecting blaster bolts, Anakin's stamina is really good. If you're parrying as an example, that's when you realize that his stamina isn't really the best. However, in more scenarios, because Anakin doesn't really have that much stamina, I like using this star card as it actually gives me a stamina reduction drain. And this is actually really important, especially when you're playing heroes versus villains, especially when you try to actually go on kill streaks with Anakin, if you're just trying to go for a record as an example. Because in more scenarios, when you have a damage reduction and also a stamina reduction as well, it also helps to keep Anakin alive in more tight scenarios as well. So when playing as Anakin, just a few tips and tricks for you guys as well. When you're playing as Anakin in more scenarios, like I mentioned, it's also really good to actually use his abilities in a loop. And what this means is, as an example, you can actually pull an enemy and then you can use Heroic Might straight after. And then because your enemies are going to be really close to you, depending on how far you actually allow them to go, depending on if you actually charge up your Heroic Might or not, you can then follow up with Passionate Strike or a couple swings from your lightsaber and then try to finish your opponents off in more scenarios. What I like to do in more scenarios is sometimes I like to actually pull my enemies towards me and then I'll actually finish them up with maybe a couple swings from my lightsaber. In more scenarios, if I'm going up against another saber wielder, sometimes they'll actually want to actually engage in a fight, so most times I can actually try to parry them and actually try to finish them off as well. So just a little tip for you guys as when we're playing Anakin, because he does have like his knockdown abilities. The pull ability, he will knock you down. His Heroic Might ability, he will knock you down. And when you use his Passionate Strike as an example, it kind of staggers the opponent and he kind of leaves them in place as an example. Sometimes what I see a lot of new players, especially whenever they play Anakin and everything, as these hero guys are mainly meant for like new players, sometimes what I see them do is that they rush you with Anakin as an example and they will charge up with Heroic Might, which is absolutely fine, but they'll actually be in a scenario where they actually can't do damage to any opponents. When you're charging up using Heroic Might, if you're going up against an experienced player, in most scenarios they can actually do damage to you for duration of period of time while you're actually in this animation if you haven't actually released it as yet. Sometimes it's good to actually just use Heroic Might just for a split second and then release it to catch your opponents off guard. Sometimes when you're just charging up, most times enemies, they can actually just damage you, and obviously because I mentioned with Heroic Might, as sometimes it's a little bit buggy, most scenarios you'll actually just take damage and you'll actually not really dish out as much damage to actually defeat your opponent that you think that you actually should. So that's where having the star card I mentioned, where it actually allows Heroic Might to do a added 50 damage increase, is actually really helpful, because in more scenarios sometimes it's actually really good to just use Heroic Might just for a couple of seconds and then just release it so that you can actually catch your opponents off guard, so that you can do extra damage to them as well, which is actually really helpful in defeating enemies really quickly as well. Because in more scenarios, a lot of players, especially veteran players, whenever they see Anakin charging up, because Anakin is going to be in that still animation and he's just holding down Heroic Might, they can just hold their lightsabers up, especially the saber wielders, and then your Heroic Might is just going to be wasted because they're just going to be blocking, waiting for you to actually finish this ability. So in more scenarios, whenever I use Heroic Might, I like to actually dash behind my opponents, and I'd highly recommend doing this as well. So when you're using Heroic Might, if you're going up against a bunch of enemies, dash behind your opponents and then use Heroic Might and then try to catch them off guard so that you can actually knock them down and then finish up with a couple saber swings afterwards. Also, when looking at Anakin and looking at his third ability, which is his Passionate Strike ability, this ability, it actually goes through blocks, and this is actually really helpful. Let's just say as an example that you're going up against an enemy or an opponent. Let's just say a saber wielder as an example, and let's just say that they're blocking. However, their life is on the brink of dying, they're very close to dying, and you can't exactly dash behind them, you can't get a couple swings in just to finish them off. When you use Passionate Strike, especially when it successfully hits them, it is actually going to do damage and it's actually going to go for their block. In most scenarios, this ability is actually really helpful, because you can actually use Passionate Strike as a finisher. So let's just say that you pull an opponent towards you, you do damage to them when you pull them, you use Heroic Might and you actually do damage to them as well. You finish up with a couple of saber swings, and let's just say now they're on the brink of actually dying, they're retreating. Well, if you can get really close to them, you can actually use Passionate Strike to finish them off. And one good thing about Passionate Strike as well is that it kind of has a little lock-on effect. So in most scenarios, if you're standing within a good radius of an opponent, especially if they're facing towards you, you can actually use Passionate Strike and it will semi-lock onto them. It doesn't work all the time, however when it does work, you'll actually realize that Anakin lunges forward at the enemy and it actually will do damage to them. And it's actually really good as well, because if you're going up against a saber wielder as an example, let's just say that you're going up against Vader or Kylo as an example, and their health is going to start regenerating because they're not receiving damage, because they are blocking all of your hits. If you use Passionate Strike, it's actually going to stop them from regenerating their health as well. So this is actually really helpful in making sure that you control your opponent's HP as well. And taking a look at Anakin's fourth ability, which is called Retribution, when you successfully use this ability, it is going to put all of your enemies within the base radius in a choke animation, similar to when you're being choked by Vader as an example, or a comparison really. This ability is really, really good. It charges up when enemies around you actually do damage to your teammates, and also when you take damage as well, it actually charges up as well, which is actually really good. So you're kind of a team player while using this ability. So most scenarios you can actually pull your opponent, then Heroic Might, and then if your Retribution is actually ready to go, you can just follow up with Retribution as well. So when using Retribution as well, I'll highly recommend actually trying to find an opening first before using it. So let's just say as an example, you can do one of Anakin's loops abilities. You can pull an enemy towards you, follow with Heroic Might, and then if you have your Retribution ready, then you can actually use Heroic Might while your opponent is actually on the floor. I'll actually recommend using Heroic Might, then actually finishing up with Retribution, because when you use Retribution as an example, if you're going up against a saber wielder as an example and they're actually blocking, it's not going to actually hit them. Therefore you're just going to be stuck in the animation and your opponents are going to be waiting for you to finish so that they can actually do damage to you, and you wouldn't want this to happen. So in most scenarios, I'll highly recommend making sure that your opponents are either knocked down first or within a good radius before you can use this. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this Anakin Skywalker hero guide. I find that a lot of new players who are coming to this game, Anakin is always going to be someone that they pick, because like I mentioned earlier in the start of the video, Anakin, he's a fan favorite. Clone Wars, from the movies, whichever you go for, even the books as well. Anakin's a very fun character to play, and he is very popular as well. He's kind of like one of the staple heroes that you see in almost every single Galactic Assault game or Supremacy game, or even Heroes versus Villains round. Anakin is always there. Whenever you get pulled, you know immediately it's Anakin, because he's the only one that can pull opponents. So I hope this hero guide has actually helped you guys to understand Anakin's abilities, and also how to actually maneuver him, and actually, in the hope at least, to hold your own against saber wielders or even blaster characters. Also managing his buggy abilities at time, therefore trying to find star cards that actually enhance your actual performance with him, with playing with him. So thank you so much guys for watching this video. Do leave a like guys if you have enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Hopefully you guys will subscribe as well, and I hope to see more of you guys on the battlefield, especially playing Anakin, because like I mentioned, he's really fun to play as, and Anakin, fan favorite, and when his abilities do work, Anakin is really, really strong. So thank you for watching guys. Take care.